Hey friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Rain or Shine stamp set. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Simple Stories Full Bloom 6x8 pad. I'm going to use this print here with the rainbows. So I'm going to pull that out and tuck it under my cardstock panel so I can refer to it as I choose my Copic markers. So I'm going to start with my bear, and I wanted him to be a lighter brown bear. So I'm going to go with some E40s. I'm using E41, E42, E43, and E44. I prefer to color darkest to lightest in almost all cases. So I'm going to start with that E44 and begin to lay my shadows down the back of his body. I also put a little bit on the bridge of his nose since the umbrella is kind of tipped over his face as well. And then I'm going to start to blend that out with the E43. And because I want to keep him fairly light, I am keeping those darkest two shades really close to the outside edge of the body, so that I have plenty of room for the majority of him for those lighter tones. So I'm going to bring in the E42 next, and always making sure to color over the edge of the previous shade so I don't get any harsh lines, and I can use little circular scribbling motions if I need to also break up the edge of any lines that start to appear. So I'm going to bring that color forward and still leave some space on his face and belly, which I will bring in the E41 for. I did decide at this point that I was going to want a fifth shade. I just wanted the lower part of the face and the belly to be even lighter, so I brought in the E40 for that. So I just filled that in, and then I did go over him with a second layer just to beef up the saturation a little bit. And then I'm going to move on to the kitty, and I wanted to do a light gray tabby cat. So I'm using C0, C1, and C3 for her. And I'm starting with the C3. Doing my shadows a little bit differently since she's facing completely forward. I want to keep the light on her face. Also, the umbrella is behind her, so the light that is in this sky, even though it is a little bit more of a stormy scene, the light would still be hitting her face because that umbrella is behind. So bringing in the color with the C1 going over the edge of the C3. I did want to keep the critters nice and light in the center as much as possible. So again, I'm keeping those darker shades toward the outer edge and then filling in the center parts with the lightest. So I'm using the C0 now for that. I'm going to start to flick in a little bit more on the lower face and the belly, but I still did leave some white areas, and I'm going to smooth the transition between the C0 and those white areas using the colorless blender to just soften up that inner section. I am going to add some detail to her later on, but for now I'm going to let her dry. And in the meantime, color the handles for all the umbrellas using C5 and C7. Just the two shades since it's a super small little area there. So I did that for all three of them. And then I'm going to come back to the C3 to do my stripes and also to color in the metal part of the umbrella. So for the cat's stripes, I like to start in the center of the face. So I just center the first stripe right over the nose, and then I come in on either side an equal distance apart. That kind of keeps them nice and even. And I'm going to do the same thing on the cheeks. I'm just going to do 2 on the cheeks since she's got those whiskers, and then also I'm going to give her some rosy cheeks. But I will also bring the stripes up the back of the arms and on the sides of her body as if they are coming across her back and then just kind of wrapping around on the sides toward the belly, but I won't bring them all the way across on the belly. I'm also going to add some stripes on the tail, and I'm going to leave the very tip of the tail white. Then I'm going to move on to the squirrel, and I'm going to do a red squirrel, but I'm going to do a little bit of a lighter version. So normally I would start a little bit darker, but like I said, I wanted to keep the critters a little bit lighter since it is more of a stormy scene, so there's a lot of heavy color coming into play later on. So I wanted to keep the critters lighter. So I'm using E11, E13, E15, and E17, laying in my shadows with the E17. On the body of the squirrel, the shadows are more heavy on the right-hand side because his body is facing left, but his face is turned more forward toward the viewer, so I did the shadows there equal on both the left and the right, and I blended out those shadows with the E15. Then I'm going to bring in the E13 and just kind of pull that color in toward that center, just like I did it with the cat. Just bringing that color in and trying to keep the belly and the lower part of the face as the lightest parts because they are the most rounded, and so I wanted them to reflect the most light. So I'm using the E11 for that, just filling him in. And I did break him down into two parts because these are a little bit of a larger image compared to some stamp companies that I use often as well. I wanted to just break it down, so I only had to concentrate on just the shadows and light source for the body, and then switched to the tail. So for the tail, I'm going to add the shadow, the E17, back behind the body because the body would be casting a shadow on that tail, and then I also put a shadow in the curve where it kind of like flips over to reference that, you know, because the light wouldn't hit there. But the light would be hitting the most at the very, very top of that tail. So that's where I'm going to put my E11. And I did do a second layer on the squirrel as well. And then I'm going to move on to the goose. And I wanted to use some warmer, creamier shades for the goose, but I still wanted her to look white. So I decided to go with E51 and E50, but I'm just using the barest amount there. Starting with that E51, and then I'll blend out with the E50, still leaving plenty of white cardstock for the highlight. But the goose was looking just a little bit too warm. I also needed to smooth the transition between the E50 and the white cardstock. So I went back to my colorless blender again to just soften the edge of that E50. But I also wanted to dull it down just slightly, so I brought in E40, which just has like a little bit more of almost like a grayish tone to it. So I thought that softened up the goose a little bit better, and I did blend that back out with the colorless blender. And then once that dries, I really did like how that combo turned out for her. And then for the rosy cheeks, I'm going to use RV10 and RV11. I'll do the same on all of them except for the squirrel because he's darker. I only did the R11. I didn't bother blending it out because that RV10 would have pushed the color of his fur out too far. I also used it on the insides of the bear and the kitty's ears and on the kitty and the squirrel's noses. So now that my critters are done, I'm going to start referring to that pattern paper and pulling my color palette from the rainbow and the background to color in all of my accessory images. So I'm starting with that top stripe on the rainbow, that pale pink, and I went with R00, R01, and R20. So I'm going to do this first stripe on the bear's umbrella. And I did do a second layer of the darkest two shades just to make that a little bit deeper and richer on the edges. And then I'm going to pick another stripe on the kitty's umbrella and do the same thing. So I just did the one that was right at the top. I didn't want to like start them all in the exact same place. And did the same exact thing with those darkest two shades, just adding a little extra of that. And then I'm going to keep that R20 and add in the R22 and the R24 for the second stripe of the rainbow, which is that red stripe. But I didn't want it to be like a super bold red because the red in the pattern paper is a little bit lighter. The rainbows are lighter on that pattern paper, so I'm trying to keep to that kind of color scheme. So right after the pink stripe on the umbrella is going to be the red one. So I did that for both the bear and the kitty. And again, just always placing that darkest shade where the metal spokes are. That's where it would be the darkest because it has that frame underneath, and then where the fabric is stretched in the center, that would be where the light would get through the most. I also did a red stripe on the squirrel's umbrella, and I'm going to give the bear some red rain boots. So adding that R24 on the back of the feet to match the shading on the body, and then blending forward with the R22 and then the R20. Now, I did need an extra shade that wasn't in the pattern paper just because of the way that the umbrellas are drawn. They had extra stripes in there. And I also needed to pull in some orange for the goose's beak and feet. But I think it works because the yellow in that rainbow is a really kind of rich golden yellow. And being right next to the red, it almost kind of tricks your eye into thinking there's orange in that pattern paper, even though there technically isn't. So I went with YR02, YR04, and YR07. Normally my go-to orange combo would start with the YR4, and then I would add in the YR09. But I wanted to keep this lighter, like I said, so that's why I added in that YR02, and I think it worked really well. I liked how this combo turned out in relation to that pattern paper. So I did 2 more stripes on both the bear and the kitty's umbrella, and I'm going to do this center stripe on the squirrel's umbrella as well. I was able to squeeze all 3 shades in there, even though it was super tiny. And then for my yellow combo, I went with Y13, Y15, and Y17 because it does have that kind of little bit of an orange undertone to it. So I think it matches the stripe in that pattern paper really well. I'm going to do another stripe on the kitty's umbrella. And I'm just going around and keeping them consistent, like which color comes after the other. You could feel free to mix it up, but I just liked that look of them kind of all having the same umbrella, but you know, they're just holding it slightly different. And then I gave the kitty some yellow rain boots. I wanted each of them to have a different color just so there would be more variety in this color palette. I also colored the sun that's kind of peeking out from behind the clouds with these same shades, putting the Y17 down closest to the cloud and then blending up with the Y15 and then the Y13. Next, I wanted to pull in that very pale aqua that is the sky in that pattern paper. So I'm using BG quadruple 0, BG10, and BG11. For the bear's umbrella, I'm not sure if the part that is behind his head is supposed to be 1 section or 2, but the kitty had an extra section. So to keep it consistent between the 2 of them, I decided to split the one that is behind the bear's head into 2 where that bar kind of comes through that handle of the umbrella, or the metal rod of the umbrella, I should say. But I did color the cloud with those shades, and then I'm going to keep the BG10 and add in the BG53 on BG57 to do the next stripe in the rainbow. So the one below the yellow one is what I'm trying to mimic now, although it is a little bit darker than the one in the pattern paper, but I was just matching as close as I could, and also trying to keep in mind what Distress Oxide inks I was going to use for the background. So that will help tie in some of the color palette as well. So I used the BG57 closest to the metal frame, and then blended out with the BG53, and then the BG10 was the highlight. And I use these shades for the little goose's rain boots. So the last stripe in the rainbow was the trickiest for me to match up to my Copics based on the ones that I had, but it was like a desaturated blue shade. It had like a little bit of gray, a little bit of green almost in it, but I ended up going with BG72, BG75, and BG78. It's a combo that I love and hardly ever get to use, so I was happy to have the chance to do it, and I think it is a fairly good match for that stripe in the rainbow at the bottom. So I did the last two stripes on the umbrella and then the squirrel's rain boots. So just filling all of those in. And then I just wanted to add in a little bit of like a duller shade to that cloud. So I decided to pull in the BG70 for that. Again, it just has like a little bit more of maybe like a grayer undertone. It's just a little more desaturated. So it kind of dulled that cloud down a little bit, which was what I needed. And then I grabbed my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and got that started off to the side. Mine's pretty old, so it gets kind of dried out. And I went over the eyes of all my critters. It just makes them nice and bright and shiny again. It just gives them a little bit of a glossy finish. And then I trimmed these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I'm taking some Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock and I'm going to blend some Distress Oxide inks onto it. And the shade that I am starting with is Speckled Egg. And I'm starting toward the right top corner and doing kind of a diagonal line from the top to the bottom. I wanted that top right corner to be really nice and light, so I'm leaving that white for now and applying that lightest shade a little bit away from it so it doesn't get overworked when I go back and forth between the colors. Then I brought in Evergreen Bough, and I wasn't sure if this was going to be the exact right shade that I wanted, but I knew that my other choice, which was Peacock Feathers, was a little bit too bright on its own. So I went ahead with the Evergreen Bough because I thought at least it would help dull down the Peacock Feathers just a little bit and kind of desaturate it to match the coloring. So I did go right over the Evergreen Bough with the Peacock Feathers, and then I'm always going back to that Speckled Egg and kind of blending those two out. So once I have a fair bit of that Peacock Feathers down and have that blended out how I want it toward the top right's not finished, but just I wanted it to be kind of like a soft fade toward that top corner. Then I'm going to bring in some chipped sapphire, and I'm going to be really careful with this color because it is really dark and I didn't want my sky to get too dark, but I wanted a little bit of that stormy darker blue in this bottom corner. A lot of the bottom is going to get covered up with my grass in a minute anyway, so I didn't worry about the bottom being like a perfect blend, but I just wanted a little bit of that chipped sapphire in that mix to kind of deepen up the peacock feathers. So I'm just going to work my way back and forth until I'm happy with how that's looking, and then on my last pass I'll fill in that top corner a little bit more. I think I still left a touch of white in the very top of the corner, but I made sure it was nice and blended out. And then I'm going to splatter this background with some clean water just to add a little bit of rain in the background. So just picking that up with a paintbrush so I get some fine droplets. And then I'm going to let that soak into the cardstock and react with those Distress Oxide inks for a few seconds before I blot it up with a paper towel. Then I'm also going to add some of the Speckled Egg back in there as well, just for a little bit of color in the rain, but I thought this really pale shade would work nicely for that. So I'll splatter that on the background as well. And just make sure I have, it kind of evenly covered. You can't see it as well in the lighter parts, but I just wanted to make sure I had it all over. And then I'll set that aside to dry. And then I've taken another piece of Bristol and trimmed that down with the grassy knoll dies from Hello Bluebird. And then I'm going to bring that evergreen bough ink back in for the grass because I didn't want to introduce any like brighter greens or even dark greens into this color palette. This was already kind of in there, so it seemed to work well. And I think it makes sense for like a rainy, watery day. And then I blended out the bottom with the speckled egg again, which I thought also kind of resembled that, maybe a little bit of standing water mixed into the grass. And I just splattered what was left of the Distress Oxide ink that was on the palette. And then I also added in some of that evergreen bough just to mix it up a bit. And then I'm going to set this panel aside to dry. So once that has dried completely, I'm going to pop it in my MISTI so that I can stamp my sentiment. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I'm stamping a sentiment from Rainbow Script, which is a separate stamp set, which I forgot to show you guys. I had it off to the side, but it's just a sentiment stamp set that works great for any kind of like rainy day, stormy weather encouragement type sentiments. So I did wishing you brighter days, and then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Lawn Fawn sticky note cardstock and sunflower ink, because I thought it would be a nice surprise for the recipient when they see this kind of stormy scene and the sentiment, wishing you brighter days, and then they open the card and it is this bright, sunshiny yellow, cheery scene. So I did another one of the little critters, a bunny holding an umbrella, and then another one of the Rainbow Script sentiments that said, sending you sunshine and rainbows, which just ties in with the entire scene on the front. So now I'm ready to start assembling, and I have trimmed that pattern paper down to fit the card front, and then I trimmed down another piece that was just the flip side of that same rainbow print pattern paper, just for a little extra contrast. So I'm going to glue that rainbow print down to cover the entire card front. So it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 is the standard size card. And then I'm going to take this kind of blue linen print and run that vertically down the center. So I'm just making sure that's on there nice and straight because that glue dries really fast, and then smoothing that into place. And then I did add some foam tape to the back of the focal panel so I could pop that up and have some dimension. Now I will say that I kind of wish I had trimmed that focal panel down slightly. I think I had room to do that, and that way you would have seen a little bit more of the rainbows on the pattern paper. You can still see it, but it would have been nice to just take it down maybe 1/4 inch just to give it a little bit more. But anyway, it's fine. So I'm going to bring in my images, and because of where that sentiment is, I do need to lay them out ahead of time and just make sure that I know where I want everything to go before I start gluing things down, because as I've said many times, my glue dries really fast, so it's really hard to adjust things once you've already adhered them. So I know that I want this cloud with the sun poking out in that top right corner. That's why I left it lighter there, as if the storm is kind of clearing a little bit. And that's where the sun is coming through. I'm just going to straighten that a little bit. And then in front of that, I'm going to add the kitty with her umbrella. And then right across from the kitty, I will add the bear. And each of them is kind of framing in that sentiment with their feet. It just kind of draws your eye toward the center and your attention toward that greeting. Then I'll add the little goose. So she is standing to the left of the bear, kind of tucking her head under his umbrella to stay out of the rain a little bit. And then on the right hand side, I'm going to add the squirrel. So it's really nice and balanced with the two critters up top and then the two critters at the bottom. Of course, I wanted to add some glitter, but I wasn't quite sure at first where I wanted to put it. I thought doing it on the umbrellas would be too much. So I decided to do something a little bit different. I did it on the bottom of the cloud, which is not so different, but then I started to add it to the tops of the little grasses as if they are collecting some of the rainwater, and so you're getting that little bit of sparkle. And then I decided to add a few little extra drops of rain throughout the sky just by pressing the tip of my Stardust stickles down on the cardstock. And I made sure to overlap some of my images as well so that the rain is falling in front of them and all around them and not just behind them. So I added just a few little dots here and there. I'm going to add one more to the goose's wing, and then I also decided to add some on the grasses as well, just to fill in some of that blank space around the sentiment. So we have a few little droplets catching on the grass, and that is going to finish up this card. So I'm going to lift that up so you can see it in a little bit more detail. And I'll give you another peek at the inside as well. I really love that bright sunshiny yellow when you open it up. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button to let me know, and make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on so you're always alerted when I post a new video. All of the products that I used will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also be interested in. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.